the Keynote. Wanted to talk just real quick about why the committee for Expression Engine Conference has brought you into Keynote. For the last couple of years, actually, we have invited people who aren't really related to the Expression Engine community, but maybe more broadly in the PHP community or in the development community in general. And that is to kind of help us bring fresh perspectives into the Expression Engine community and kind of get us out of our bubble, because there's a lot of, I don't have my hands nearly in all that many communities, but I am a little bit in the PHP community, and so are you. So why don't you kind of tell me what community things you might have been involved in, now or in the past or something like that.
So I'm going to try and keep this list short because I've been in PHP land since 1999,
Nice.
Which is like 20 years at this point. And I have been involved in a lot of stuff in that 20 years. If your memory goes that far back, I was one of the original, I was one of the people who was voted into the pair leadership positions when they opened it up to voting. And again, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, wow.
I was, and that's after it became after it became a voting sort of thing. I was a founding member of the Zend framework version 1. ZendDB and ZendView were my initial contributions to that when I worked at Zend.
For those of our audience who aren't, because we have a lot of front-end developers, they may not know, this is a big deal in the PHP world. These are foundational elements of PHP, and Expression Engine is a PHP CMS, so it's pretty cool.
Right. So there's that. If you wanted to get a certification in PHP, I was one of the people who wrote questions for the Zend certification. I forget, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about which questions I wrote in there, but they're definitely in there, and I also helped manage the question shepherding process for which questions got in and how that all got managed. I was one of the founding members of the PHP Framework Interoperability Group. If you are familiar with PSR0, PSR1, PSR2, PSR1, PSR2, or PSR4, I was the person who was responsible for shepherding those through the acceptance process.
And those are coding standards, right?
PSR1 and PSR2 are coding standards. PSR4 is an autoloading standard. It is a refinement of PSR0. And again, whenever we talk about coding standards, the hair goes up on the back of their necks.
It's a religious debate.
Yeah, absolutely it is. If you like them, that's great. If you don't like them, well, I'll take the blame. Of course, there are lots of people involved in those. I was just the person on PSR 1 and 2. I was just the person shepherding them through with PSR 4. I was the primary driving force behind it.
Basically, what you're saying is you're responsible for the tabs versus spaces debate.
Yes, that's all my fault, as if people don't want to blame me for enough in PHP land anyway. And that's just the sort of the direct community involvement. There are lots of other things. I've spoken at tons of conferences before. It's something that I enjoy doing. As far as open source work is concerned, again, way back in pair days, PHP 4, some pair work, the Aura framework / library project. Most recently, it is Atlas, which is a collection of database libraries that help you go from just a plain old connection up to a full-featured ORM for your persistence model. And I'm at a loss for when I have to sign my contract for employment, they always say, what are your prior inventions? And it's always this list of like 50 things that I've done.
Yeah. I mean, you've had your hands in a lot of stuff.
One for good or ill, yeah.
And you're kind of, at least to me, I think, and you're kind of known for being a proponent of and even kind of codifying, can I say that, the action domain responder pattern in PHP land.
Yes. So I wrote, you asked again about things that I might be known for. I wrote a book several years ago called Modernizing Legacy Applications in PHP. There are a lot of legacy applications in PHP.
A whole lot. Expression Engine even.
I've not looked at Expression Engine directly, so I can't say one way or another.
It's been around since the early 2000s.
Then I'm sure some people would feel that way about it.
Yes.
But in the course of writing the book, I got to the chapter on writing the presentation portion, the view portion of Model View Controller. And in writing that chapter, I had to scrap it and rewrite it because I realized that what we think of as the view in server-side applications is not really much of a view. It's sort of a combination of things where the separation of concerns is probably not the way we would prefer them to be. And in doing so, after I published the book and have rewritten that chapter about how to get a good separation between the controller and the view in a model view controller situation, I realized that model view controller is not something that actually exists on the server side.
Right. Right. That's sort of more like a running application kind of idea, isn't it?
Yeah, model view controller originated in the graphical user interface client side in memory systems. And what we see on server-side applications, especially in particularly in PHP, that does not describe our applications at all.
It's a request response.
Request response over the network, shared nothing environment. And so in thinking about that and in going out and researching how people were building their applications, and especially in relation to how you would modernize a legacy application, I realized that with essentially a couple of small tweaks to what we think of as model view controller, we can come up with a pattern that is much more descriptive of what we actually do on a regular basis. And the terms that I settled on, or the term that I settled on for that, is action domain responder. The idea being that the action is what you currently think of as a controller method, not just a controller, but an individual controller method, where all it does is capture the input, send that input off to a domain level off to a domain layer, gets back a result set of some sort, and then passes that result to a responder. And the responder's job is to build the HTTP response so that you get a much better, much cleaner separation of concerns there. So that's the origin of action domain responder. People will tell me, well, you invented this, you created this, and I prefer to say that I recognized it and gave it a name.
Right.
Rather than that I invented it, because these things had already existed in some form anyway. It was just taking those things that already existed and applying a name to it. Is the extent of what I did.
Yeah. Well, as you all can see, Paul's a very smart guy. He's recognized, if we can't say he created, he's recognized patterns, and just has a really great way of thinking about these things, and it's really benefited me from a PHP development perspective of just kind of action domain responder, and specifically has been really revelatory to me. But this is all very technical, and we have a lot of technical and non-technical people, PHP front end, project managers, all these sorts of things at the Expression Engine conference. So why don't you tell us, because your keynote is not really technical. It's about, as I understand it, managing people and working with people and these sorts of things. But you're going to be much better at talking about that than I am. So tell us a little bit about your keynote.
So the title is, and it's gone through a couple of different titles. The original title was "The Same Thing Happens Every Time: Movies, Mythology, and Management." We've just gotten done talking about technical patterns, action domain responder. Of course, there are lots of other technical patterns out there. The gateway pattern, table data gateway. There is model view controller as a pattern. So all these technical patterns that we see popping up in software over and over again. But if we step back for a moment and we think about the rest of our life, if you look at things, you will see that there are other patterns emerging in your life in other areas that you never thought about. And the easiest way to see this is to look at the movies that we watch and compare them to mythology, specifically Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero with 1,000 faces, the monomyth, the hero's journey that he talks about, and then look at that in terms of the movies that we watch. And so in a lot of ways, the first half of this talk is just an excuse for me to talk about my favorite movies.
Of course, who doesn't want to do that?
Exactly. And then point out all the things that are happening every time in every movie that you love, and then once you see it, it's kind of hard not to see it anymore. And transition from that to, once I have hopefully pointed out to you that these patterns do exist in other places, transition from our movies and our entertainment to our work life and the patterns that we see in our work interactions all the time, so that you can learn to recognize them and then learn to deal with them effectively in your work life. So in a way, it is a soft talk, but it's a soft talk about our work life and all the things that we see going on while we are attempting to apply technical solutions to things. I'm
really excited to hear this presentation. Honestly, it is. I love talking about movies, and like you said, who wouldn't want to talk about those? And even though I know kind of what you're talking about with the patterns, and like my recognition of those patterns doesn't lessen my enjoyment of the film. In fact, I think it enhances it, and I think hopefully the same thing is going to be true when we start looking at work patterns and seeing it doesn't take away from this pattern is happening, but it enhances our ability to interact at work and to be better, working with people. I hope.
Absolutely, I completely agree. If you find, and this is one of the things what I said earlier was the original title of this was same thing happens every time.
Mm-hmm.
If you find the same things happening to you over and over again, you don't know why. Maybe it'd be a good idea to recognize them in advance so that you know what's going on, and even better, learn how to deal with them effectively, or cut them off earlier so that they don't keep happening to you over and over and again. Or alternatively, like you said, when they do happen and you like them, learn to enjoy them and learn to see the variations in them and enjoy those variations.
Absolutely. It sounds a lot like, and I know personality types can really get off into the weeds, and various people have various ideas about them, but I've found it very useful to know my personality type, generally speaking, and to know others, generally speaking, and to kind of not, I know profiling has a bad rap, and rightly so oftentimes, but if you know generally how you interact with other personalities, it can really greatly enhance your relationships with people. And people who, when I was younger, it surprises no one who knows me that I'm super opinionated about things. And so when I was younger, I would often clash heads with people. And now knowing why my personality is prone to that, and how that especially interacts with others, like that can really help you make friends that you wouldn't have made before. And this sounds like a very similar kind of idea.
Absolutely. Or you can learn to, even if you can't learn to make friends with people exactly, you can come to a place of understanding with them, or you can learn to sort of enjoy their point of view without necessarily accepting it as your own. You can learn to both accept and let things go at the same time, even though that is not specifically what this talk is about. That is a lead-in. The talk is a lead-in to those kinds of things.
Yes. Very good. I'm super excited to hear this, and I think that
it's one of my favorites. I love giving it.
Yeah. Well, you actually, because I asked you to present a couple that we could choose for keynotes, and that was the one everybody agreed, and I agreed when we were choosing that's the one we want. So really excited to hear this. Look forward to seeing you in Minneapolis, Paul. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.